Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Page Turners Plus. As promised the last time you saw us, today we'll be interviewing Nigel Thomas, the author of A Different Hurricane. Thank you for joining us, Nigel.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
Yes. So, to start, we could focus a bit on the protagonist and his best friend. So, Gordon, the protagonist, is not a risk taker. His best friend, Alan, is a lot bolder. Did you consciously choose to present your readers with a risk averse protagonist and another character who is more willing to take risks? If so, why?
Well, let me simply say that this is a novel where I wanted the whole business of reality being reflected. Um, a, a novel in which you could say that I hold the mirror up to nature. And insofar that as people can be risk takers or can be cautious, and insofar as there are consequences to both dispositions, you know, I think the characters are reflective of reality. So yes, it would have been at the very least a semi-conscious choice.
Let's go to Maureen. Maureen has read. I don't want to spoil it for readers who haven't yet read the novel, but Maureen has good reason to be very angry at Gordon, but she wills herself to be fair and to be gracious. Why was this important to this story that Maureen should respond in this way?
Um, well, for one thing, Maureen is raised in a society with a sort of a Christian ethos, which certainly encourages people to be compassionate and to be forgiving. And I suppose, like all people, or like most people, she exercises it somewhat selectively. And in this particular case, um, Gardner is a beneficiary of that. Um, she's well aware of the circumstances that lead Gordon to make the decisions, the choices, if you can really actually call them choices, um, that result in the kind of life that she and Gordon lead and the consequences of that life. And so she does feel, in a way, that she has to absolve him for what he has done to her. I, I would say I would say it's genuinely uh, um, a compassionate trait, though of course she doesn't display it in other situations.
Let me
Yeah.
have a quick follow up. Beth
Hmm.
does not respond in the same way. She is angry and she is not going to pretend that she's not angry.
Well,
Um,
okay, go ahead.
no, did you deliberately have these two contrasting responses? Is that something you wanted to explore? Two diametrically different responses to a similar situation.
Yeah. Well, I think from the very first time when you meet Beth, you know that she is much more of a no nonsense person than Maureen is. It's equally true that if I'm going to hold the mirror up to nature, I cannot show two women who, in fact, react the same way to the circumstances they're presented with. And so Maureen's at one end and Beth is another. And I suppose there are several women who probably might very well fall in the middle. Yes, I can easily see. I mean, I think she reflects what women would do in some women would do in similar circumstances. Yeah, it felt right for me that she should react that way.
Continuing on Beth, actually, Beth has a convenient morality, and not revealing too much to those who haven't read it yet. But Beth was okay with Alan stepping out, so long as he was stepping out with women.
Yeah.
Then the minute she finds the opposite, you know, she explodes for want of a better term. So, did you also want to put that mirror up to shine, to show the convenient morality that exists sometimes in Caribbean society?
Well, I'm not even so sure that it's a convenient morality. She, Beth is shaped obviously by the society in which she lives. And in that society, however much wives react negatively to their husbands philandering, it's generally uh, a kind of they respond stoically to it. And so, in her conversation with Maureen about it, she sort of says, "Well, I know he probably fools around, but as long as all other things are equal, it's fine." Um, the I mean, I if she discovered, for example, Alan's infidelity in a somewhat different context, would she necessarily have reacted that way had it not been a public affair? It probably could have been different, So there is a nuance.
One of the thoughts I had about Beth's reaction is that the certainly Maureen describes Beth's relationship with Alan as perfect.
Hmm.
And Beth herself is very sexually satisfied.
That's right.
And and I was I mean what I thought is that it was just shocking to her. Because they have this very good sex life. She was just absolutely shocked that her husband was not heterosexual. I don't know if I was just projecting.
Well, let me put it this way. I know people who are very comfortable um, with their bisexuality, and so it's quite. In fact, I'm convinced. I hadn't thought of this through necessarily when I was writing the novel, but I'm pretty sure that Alan is comfortably bisexual, and I think Gordon says that somewhere, that he's probably just bisexual, whereas Gordon is not. Gordon is definitely not bisexual. He has to fake it.
So, for all of Maureen's graciousness, she's not without sin. The way she went about conceiving Frida is a case in point. Was this her Shakespearean tragic flaw?
I am not sure that I will call it a Shakespearean tragic flaw. I'm not sure that it rises to that level. It's not Othello, who is so jealous to the point where he strangles his wife, or Hamlet's dithering that results in the deaths of different people, or Lear's foolishness, for example, or that leads to the loss of his kingdom, or Macbeth and the bloodshed that follows. But it certainly is it's a flaw of sorts. Still in all, she's 30, and the years for fertility are diminishing, and so she probably wants to force Gordon's hand. And I don't think she probably had any thoughts that Gordon might not have wanted a child. Um, so so he didn't say specifically that he wanted one, and they made arrangements for her to take the pill and so on and so forth. But I don't think, I mean, she herself when he says no and wants her to have an abortion, she herself is shocked. She probably did not expect, that was not the result that she expected. As she said, she expected him to be proud of the fact that he was going to be a father. And I think psychologically, men somehow, upon the announcement of having their first child, usually there is some sort of, I think this is hormonal, something or the other that kicks in that makes them feel good about the whole process. And this is not the case with Gordon. So I won't quite say that. Sure, she should have consulted with him, but she probably felt that she could nudge him in that direction. So that would be my that would be my response.
Might this have factored into why she wasn't so angry, or didn't display anger, because she felt the anger, but she was very careful not to display it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
She would know, once once the whole thing comes to a head, once she discovers his well, homosexuality, we can say that. She realizes that that decision to have a child complicated his life and her life. Um, I think Maureen understands that Gordon is who he is, and there is nothing that can alter that. She also understands, and she says it's in different places, that society forced him into wearing the mask of heterosexuality and so on. If there is anything to blame him for, it's for his using her as this mask, and that's the problem. But of course, in having freedom, Gordon's entire life is changed, and she has to accept that that decision to have a child complicated Gordon's life and her own. And she understands then quite fully why it is the marriage had to be conducted in such a sparse sort of way, without a great deal of ceremony. Something which Maggie has a great deal of insight into. She says, he is going to leave you, you know, and but for freedom, he would have left her. No doubt about that.
I want to delve further into the characters of this novel, and we recognize that they are mainly educated middle class characters. Why did you choose to tell this story from that perspective?
Okay, boy, that I think was one of the most challenging questions. Where do I begin? The gay men that I know are middle class, all of them. Um, Here and in Saint Vincent. I thought very deeply about the question, and it led me to wonder whether, in fact, I could write a novel about a working class gay man in St. Vincent. And my answer was no. I would not know enough about the person's life in order to do so. I know or knew, because some of them are dead, um, about three gay middle class men in St. Vincent. And I had a pretty good knowledge of how they functioned. Um, and so my imagination was able to get enough material from that to structure the lives of Alan and Gordon. Um, while I lived in St. Vincent, there was, I remember, a road worker. At the time, I was 20. There's a fellow who worked in a road gang who snuffed me out, so to speak, one evening at a political rally. This would have been 1967, and the elections were going on, and he was there listening to the speeches in what was then called Market Square, and he snuffed me out. And he tried over a long period, I would say about 3 months or so, to see if he could develop a relationship with me. And I was just so horrified, not because he walked in the road, but because I just did not want anybody to, in any way, I didn't know who this guy was. I didn't know what sort of reputation he had. And I just did not want the stigma of homosexuality attached to me in any way, shape, or form. And in the end, I was extremely hostile. And luckily for me, after that 3 month period, I went back to live in the country. So he never had opportunities to talk to me about this. Um, it made me, your question made me think about that. Now, at best, the most I could probably write about a working class gay man in St. Vincent would, the most I would probably get from a fictional exploration might be a short story. I won't be able to write a novel.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm going to move pretty far away from where we are now. Apart from the way the society treats the queer community, the novel addresses violence against women and children, um, and what Maureen describes as limited opportunities for entertainment and a sterile life lacking in possibilities for intellectual growth. How do those concerns relate to the central concern of the novel?
Well, this is a novel that is character driven, undoubtedly. It's also a novel that holds the mirror up to nature. And insofar as it's character driven, um, one has to look at the forces that go into creating Maureen's and Gordon's characters, as well as the other characters. And society, the forces in society shape us. We're shaped by our environment. And so it became necessary for me to evoke that environment. It also works, certainly in terms of Gordon's and Maureen's relationship. Um, it's sort of set off or contrasted, might be the better word, with what actually other relationships are like. For example, Freckles' and Christine's, and Maureen's own relationship with her father, or Gordon's with his own father, or Gordon's mother with Gordon's father, and so on. So that's really it. Was I wanted my reader to engage more fully with the society, and in order to do that, I quite clearly had to bring in all of these elements and so on. In fact, um, much of the criticism, positive criticism that the novel receives here, cites those factors, those aspects of the novel, the ability to create the society, to make, as it were, the setting like a principal character in the novel.
So I actually wanted to sort of go along those lines. You referred to some real persons and events in the novel. In most cases, you changed their names, but usually that was the only thing you fictionalized. Was it? Why was it important for you to refer to real people and events in telling this story?
Um, well, certainly um, it increases, it heightens the mimetic quality of the novel. But the fact of the matter is that once something has become part of history, it you can easily incorporate it into fiction. Um, uh, that's why we have historical novels. Um, and these are events, obviously, that are pertinent. I don't think there's any of them. I mean, they tend usually to relate directly to the theme of homosexuality, queerness, if you prefer. Um, um, I I'm thinking now. I certainly name. There's one character that I name, a fat man. That's a fellow who poisoned himself in the Mariaquat Valley. Um, I think back in 1986, and he's mentioned. Um, I think by I think it's Gordon who mentions him um, to sort of highlight the kind of persecution that gays endure and the extremes to which they sometimes go to escape that persecution. That is to say, suicide. So, yeah, it's part of the historical record, and hence it becomes material to be used. Once once these facts become incorporated into the narrative, they then function to some extent as metaphor.
You were very careful not to mention the names of victims of sexual violence. Not sorry, not sexual violence, of um, violence against queer men. You were very careful because you mentioned very real situations that I know of because I
Hmm.
live here on Saint Vincent,
Right.
where gay men have been subjected to violence. But
Hmm.
I noticed in every single one of those instances, I remember three distinctly. You changed the names. However, you did not change the names of certain people, of politicians,
That's right.
and of religious activists who are very active in persecuting gay people. Um, and I
Oh, yeah.
tell me about that. I liked the choice, but tell me why you made it.
Um, yeah, well, I'm thinking of the politicians, for example. But as I said, once the thing's done, it becomes a part of the historical record, and you can't really deny it. I'm thinking in terms of the two politicians that I name. I was on my lying um, in my bed in Brighton, and I listened to that particular campaign, and I heard the song Bun Chichi Man played in connection to somebody that was being lambasted by the politician in question. And so on. I read the Searchlight account of that politician who said that he would like to um, set gays on fire and so on and so forth. I'm not. Oh yes, okay. There's the yes, the religious
Yes, there's a
pursuit.
woman who is a religious activist,
Oh
and you mentioned her
yes,
name
of
in
course, of course,
her
of,
full government name.
of course,
Which
of
and I
course.
was very pleased with the choice
I,
because if she
yeah,
is so
yeah,
proud, she shouldn't have a problem with it being memorialized.
yeah. Of course,
So
of course,
I
of
was happy
course.
with the choice.
Yeah, yeah. It's some funny. The fellow who in the United States, who is leading the court, who is co one of the plaintiffs in the case to decriminalize same-sex activity in Saint Vincent. He told me he's read the novel and he said he was glad that I spelled that out. Yeah. Um, yeah, as I said, they're all of these instances are directly related to the persecution of gays, and hence put into stark relief why, for example, people like Gordon and Allen would want to mask their sexuality. Yeah, 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 yeah. I have nothing more to say about it, and so on. There is an instance of a character called Marty who couldn't get it up with his wife. That's based on knowledge. Um, but of course, I won't mention such a person's name or give enough details that anybody could say you can specifically trace it to this or that particular person because I'm cognizant of the kind of damage that that could cause. That would be more like gossip rather than truth. Yeah.
Actually wanted to pick up in terms of the people that you mentioned, the religious activists and the politicians. Have they been made aware that they might have been referenced in your novel?
No, I don't think so, and I doubt they would even find out. I mean, I don't.
This program runs on national TV, so they might find out. They
Well,
probably
yeah,
will.
but there are no copies of A Different Hurricane in Saint Vincent. My publishers are a bit arrogant in this regard. They say that so few books sell in the Caribbean that they don't think it's worth um, having a distributor down there. And they're quite happy to distribute in Australia and New Zealand and Europe and so but not in the Caribbean.
That's a problem we have. Sometimes we cannot find Caribbean books. Very often we can't find Caribbean books in the Caribbean,
Yeah.
especially here on St. Vincent.
When I come home in the fall, I'll bring some copies, and hopefully, games would offer to carry them. Yeah.
So you've set other novels in a fictional Caribbean space called Isabella Island.
Mhm.
You did not fictionalize the space in this novel. Why was this important?
Well, first, it's how the novel came to me. I don't sit down and say, I'm going to write a novel about such and such and such and such. Characters come to me, they come fraught with a certain number of issues. And if they obsess me for a very, very long time, I will be forced to find out why. And invariably, it takes the form of fiction. In the case of Isabella Island, Spirits in the Dark, and I guess again, which other novel I have there, Return to Arcadia. And there are some short stories as well set on Isabella Island. It's because I want a more generic Caribbean reality. Spirits in the Dark could be the issues in Spirits in the Dark apply to the Caribbean, and not just even. I happen to know the French Antilles fairly well, and they they can even apply to Martinique and Guadeloupe. I'm familiar with the works of Raphael Confiant and those guys. It's the same sort of anthropological concerns that a novel like Spirits in the Dark raises. The whole question of going back to Africa, either through dreams or imagination, in order to reestablish, to concretize, to decolonialize one's self. Yeah. So, yeah, it's more of a generic thing. The plantocracy reigned throughout the Caribbean, and so taking it on in a novel like Return to Arcadia, it's valid if such a novel would be valid in Jamaica, it would be valid in Barbados, it would be valid in Saint Vincent, in Martinique, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's the difference. But in this particular case, I I mean, I could have set it on Isabella Island as well, because persecution of gays is common throughout the Caribbean. The difference, though, there's a difference. Same sex practices have been decriminalized in some of the islands. So it would probably not quite apply uh, in, in quite the same way. Yeah.
I want to ask you a ticklish question. Isn't it problematic to address the status of gay men and the problem of HIV in the same breath?
No, it's not. Um, if you force gay men into the shadows, you are increasing the risk uh, that you're increasing the risk of a higher incidence of HIV. I'm thinking of in my last novel, for example, before this one, with my character Stiliford, when he's asked, does he practice safe sex? He says, you know, sometimes the opportunities don't come when I'm equipped. Um, and, you know, you're in a situation you don't really, you live at home with your mother. You don't have a place of your own to go, for example. You meet someone, you're attractive, etc., etc. You have no condoms with you. The urge is there. Depending on how strong your will is, you might succumb. The possibility might be infection with HIV. So no, I don't see a contradiction at all.
I didn't say it was a contradiction. I just think it's problematic. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I know that you've read that judgment because you mentioned the claimant.
Yeah.
Um, and that judgment is largely, the decision largely was based on a supposition
Hmm.
that HIV is a gay disease and essentially that gay men are vectors of HIV. And I have a major problem with that supposition, that basis on which the court made its findings. I have major problems with the whole judgment,
Hmm.
but that I found extremely problematic. Um, and I'm wondering
Yeah, I,
if
I
you
think
didn't consider that this might play into that narrative.
it's interesting because Sean McLeish and I talked about this, um, and my very good friend Faisal Dean, um, who loved the novel. Uh, we've talked about this. No, it's not so much that in the novel, very specifically, um, it's really two men who meet, have sex in a relationship. They don't live in the same island, on the same island, etc., etc., etc. And for whatever reason, one infects the other. Oops. I um I don't know. It's just, I mean, is it possible? Yes, it's possible. Um, did I reduce it to a stereotype? I suppose that accusation can be made, but the fact of the matter is that women who are married to men who mask, men who are on the down low, do in fact open themselves to this possibility. I'll tell you something, Paula. This didn't come out of thin air. I had I know three people here. Two of them were very close acquaintances. They were married. They Their wives apparently did not know that they were gay. Um, they gave their wives, um, they infected their wives. The In two of the cases, the wives died, and in one of those cases, a child died. Um, that's reality. Um, I have friends who work in the CLSCs here. That is a sort of uh, structure that offers social services, medical help, and all that sort of a thing called a CLSC. And they tell me, if this friend of mine has told me that a substantial number of black men whom they deal with have wives who do not know that they're gay. I lived that experience here. Um, there's also a component, an autobiographical component to this. When I left St. Vincent in 1968, I was engaged to be married. And I have thought over and over and over again, what would my life have been if I had gone through with that marriage? Um, Let me say for make the make this clear. I am not HIV positive, and so on and so forth. But I certainly do have friends who are fortunately are alive still because of antiretroviral drugs who are HIV positive. I would be the last person to want that stereotype attached to gays. However, it is a fact that um, gays who are married um, and who may contract HIV and may pass it on to their wives. It's an indisputable fact.
Fair enough.
I want to continue along the lines of social relationships and focusing on parent child relationships. So, other than Gordon's relationship with Frida and Austin's relationship with Theo, every parent child relationship we saw up close in the novel was difficult. Why
Well,
is that?
it's 2 out of 5. That's 40%. I see you're
True?
laughing. Yeah, look, I grew up in a village where I did not know. I don't know. If there were children in my village, in the village where I grew up, that didn't get beaten by their parents, I didn't know them, quite frankly. Look, one of the things that we understand least, certainly during my time as a child, and I'm almost 80 years of age, so I am really talking about a period in my life um, when perhaps things were more difficult. But I'm not even sure. Sometime in the 1980s, I was in St. Vincent and I went to visit a teacher whom I'd mentored. And while I was in the office talking with him, one teacher came and asked for the strap. And I said, "Oh, you're going to beat a child." And I said, "So what did this child do?" And she said, "Oh, I this is a little girl to whom I give a lot of attention. And this day I was chatting with another student, and she came and she was pulling at my dress because she needed my attention." I said, "And you're going to beat her for that?" "Yes, I'm going to teach her how to have manners." And I said, "No, no, 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 no. This is a teachable moment for you. You just go and explain to how the child would understand it. That there are moments when you can give her attention and moments when you can't give her. You're not going to beat her for that." And that ended. And while I was there, another teacher came and asked for the strap. And he said, I said to him that he was the son of a teacher who used to love to use the strap. He certainly left welts on my back, his father. And I said, "So what are you going to beat this kid for?" "Oh, no, this boy not paying attention. He yawning in class." I said, "Did you ask him if he had breakfast? Did you ask him if he slept well last night? That might be the reason why he's yawning. Are you going to beat him for that?" And so on and so forth. Now, those things are so elementary uh, if you've been taught how to identify them and deal with them. And that's the kind of it was that sort of show of force and authority and the use of pain for compliance is so huge in our society. I Since I wanted to reflect the society, I quite clearly had to show that. Now, these guys that I show, they're not, they're not the worst. Those fathers are not the worst ones. They're not the worst ones. I mean, there is a discussion between Maureen and Gordon about their fathers. And Maureen sort of says that Gordon's father was better because he was there for his family and so on. And yeah, in Clem's case, he just didn't want to be a father. I think I hinted that in the story that he didn't want to be a father, but he had um, Maureen at 19. No man is prepared to be a father at 19. He just doesn't have the experience, etc., etc. Now, there is no mention of his father. He probably didn't have a father. You see, so this is a sort of a thing that feeds, into itself. Hence my representation of these characters. I mean, I had one, my father, the only thing my father understood was do as I say, and if you don't, I will rain blows on your back. And that was that. There was never any. It's true. He was raised as in a squatter plantation. He didn't know any better, and so on and so forth. Fortunately, I wasn't always subjected to that. I lived with my grandparents. Why my grandfather never beat me, I that's another story I won't get into. But for the most part, fathers just did not know how to deal with their children. I'm not sure. I mean, Maureen's mother is different, but only up to a point. Only up to a point. Yeah, that's. I think I was reflecting the society. I don't think I was being unfair to the society in the way I represented it. Now, it's probably true that today things are different. I know, Paula, you and I have talked a great deal about parenting in St. Vincent, and I've seen editorials in the Vincentian opposing Vincentian, or is it Searchlight? I don't remember which, opposing corporal punishment. So things have changed, but in Gordon's day and Maureen's day, they're about my age. That's how things were.
I think we may be out of time, but I just want one quick question before we
Ye-
close.
yes, go ahead.
Nigel, what would you like your readers to take away from the novel?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I um very often when I think of why I write, I think it's just my way of exploring being in the world, and I think some many people have said that the way you would get to know anyone, the only way you can get to know people intimately is through reading. The sorts of things that get revealed about characters are not the sort of things that um, you can get normally so easily revealed with people in real life. You have to go to fiction to get into the inner workings, to know what people are thinking, what they're concealing, and so on and so forth. So, being ways of being in the world with all the restrictions, what have you, those restrictions that are part of our psychology, as well as those restrictions that come from outside of us that are environmental. And so, if the reader contemplates what's depicted in the novel and I suppose develop some sort of compassion for people who are forced to wear masks because masking is probably the central masking and its consequences are the principal theme of the novel. So maybe if that's the case, then that would be fine for me.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today.
Okay.
But I'm just alerting our viewers that the next time they see us, we'll be reflecting on Wendell Semple's Kipling Class. Before we go, however, we will leave you with a reading from A Different Hurricane by Nigel Thomas. Thank you for joining us.
I'm reading from chapter 9. Alan had been back for 5 years when Maureen announced her pregnancy. She whispered it in Gordon's ear as they were entering a restaurant in Rathermill, where they were having a going away party for Winnie, who was relocating to California. Gordon was so stunned he didn't remember what was on the menu that evening. As soon as Alan drove away from dropping him and Maureen off at Maggie's house, Gordon exploded. You did that to force me to marry you, didn't you? No. She began mounting the stairs to the house. He reached for her arm and pulled her back. We have a few things to talk about before you go in. Why did you do this? I'm on the list of candidates for study abroad. It's an accident. I don't believe you. You told me you were on the pill, otherwise, I would have used condoms. The pill isn't foolproof. Get an abortion. Abortion is murder. Are you mad? And deception? What do you call deception? She began to cry. He realized he was still holding her arm, preventing her from moving. He let it go. Well, I'm not going to marry you. I'm not ready. I'm not marrying. He caught himself before saying anyone. She knew he spent more time with Alan than with her. It had on occasion caused friction. She might speculate that something was going on between them. She'd asked him once if there was another woman, if he'd become tired of her. The yard light came on. Seconds later, the front door opened, and Maggie, already in her nightie, came onto the landing. Maureen turned to mount the steps. You're not coming in? Not tonight. I need to clear my head.